Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Late Sunday night, Josh Pate got on and really dug in to the USC defense and talked about how he doesn't think that this USC defense takes the strides that a lot of USC fans believe will take place heading into 2024. I want to dig into that conversation, push back on a few points that he had. Now, I want to make it extremely clear that, one, Josh Pate does a phenomenal job. This is not me going after Josh Pate. I listen to him every single chance that I get. And secondly, I'm certainly not hopping on and saying that this USC defense is going to be a top 10 defense in the country in 2024. But what I am saying is that this USC defense was one of the worst defenses in the country in 2023 in almost every single statistical category that you look at. And what I'm going to say is that there is reason to believe that this USC defense does make marginal improvements and can become an average to maybe an above average defense heading into 2024. Want to get into this conversation. Really excited to do so. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys. Massive shout out to the USC fans. Y'all have showed a ton of support to the fellas over the last couple of months. Cannot thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, would love to hear some feedback in the comments section as well, whether you're a USC fan, whether you're not a USC fan and think that I am wrong. Throw it in the comments section. We'll chop it up. That's the beauty of college football. We are going to disagree. We're going to have some conversations in the comments section. Let it rip in the comments section. We'll chop it up. And without further ado, let's get into this one. I first want to talk about USC not having the players to be a good defense in 2024, where I even look back at that 2023 season and say they had the players to be a very solid defense in 2023, right? You look at the defensive line, guys like Bear Alexander, Kyon Barrs came over from Arizona. He was an all Pac-12 performer. You have guys like Solomon Byrd coming. He's going to go to the NFL draft. Jamil Muhammad probably could have gone to the NFL draft had he wanted to. I look at that USC defensive line and say it was a solid group from a personnel standpoint. You look back to the linebacker room and say Mason Cobb, although played not very good in 2023, I'd say downright bad. I think he would probably agree with that. Mason Cobb coming over to USC was an all Big 12 performer at Oklahoma State. He was a certified good linebacker during that 2022 season with Oklahoma State. He comes to USC, doesn't play very well. You look at the back end, Kalen Bullock going to the NFL draft, a guy like Damani Jackson, all the talent in the world, Christian Roland Wallace, he was an all Pac-12 performer at Arizona. You look at that personnel from that USC defense in 2023 and say that defense should have been at least an average defense in the country last year. All right, what was wrong with that USC defense? I think most USC fans certainly know that it was Alex Grinch. Not only from a player development standpoint where you had guys like Mason Cobb or Kyon Barrs or Christian Roland Wallace come in and were really good football players at their previous schools and just not play to their caliber that we saw at their previous schools, but also, the schematics of the defense. A lot of busted coverages, one of the worst tackling defenses and worst disciplined defenses in the country. I think a lot of USC fans say, you look at that team in 2023 and say, we certainly had the players to be a good unit. We just didn't put it on the field. And now I think the second conversation you have to have is you bring in D'Anton Lynn. And D'Anton Lynn, I think Josh Pate even said, phenomenal hire, but he said it's going to take time. What I would say is you look at D'Anton Lynn, what he did with that UCLA defense. He took that defense from an average to below average defense in 2022 and made it one of the best defenses in the country in 2023. A couple numbers to take a look at. Gave up over 400 yards of total offense in 2022 that UCLA Bruins defense did. In 2023 with D'Anton Lynn, only 307 yards. A massive improvement immediately, seemingly overnight, for D'Anton Lynn and that UCLA defense. To take a look, top 15 in scoring, 4.5 yards per play. That was number 8 in the country. 2.7 yards per carry. That was number 2 in the country. 6.5 yards per pass. That was number 19 in the country. You saw that UCLA defense take a monster step heading into 2023. And if you see USC even take half of that step that UCLA defense took, it's going to be an average defense in the country heading into 2024. And I think there's a strong argument that UCLA defense had some very good players. Guys like Leate Latu, the Murphy brothers, very, very good defense from a personnel standpoint. I think there's reason to believe that USC defense in 2023 was just as talented. And you talk about what went wrong with that USC defense, the coaching staff, the player development. And I think the last conversation to have before we dive into this current USC defense is that it's going to take time, right? And it's going to take time for this USC defense to make those improvements, and you're not going to see it immediately happen in 2024. What I would argue is, with the transfer portal being like it is today, you can see units take massive steps because you have the ability to completely overhaul your personnel. You guys are seeing the depth chart on your screen. That is 5 or 6 projected new starters for this USC defense heading into 2024. Yes, I think in 2010, it would take a couple of years for D'Anton Lynn to turn around this defense because you need the personnel to get right. But I think in 2024, you don't need that time. You've seen units all across the country dramatically increase their production because of the transfer portal. You have the ability now to go out and get a almost brand new roster and add marquee impact player guys to have significant improvement in a one-off season. And I think that's exactly what this USC defense has done. Now, you look at this USC defense and say, yeah, they're far ways away from being a top 30 defense in the country. I think that secondary is arguably, we said this after the spring game, arguably the most improved secondary that you'll see in the country. You saw that during the spring game. The throwing windows were non-existent. Guys were getting hands-on footballs. There was not a single busting coverage during that whole spring practice. That's rare during the spring. You look at John Humphrey, DeCarlos Nicholson, Achille Arnold, Kamari Ramsey. You brought in 4 new starters and arguably 5 new starters with the addition of Greedy Vance Jr., right? So this USC secondary has arguably 5 new starters that are coming in. There is a lot of reason to believe that unit improves. You look at the linebacker spot, you add all Pac-12 performer Easton Mascarenas-Arnold, and I think the conversation is Easton Mascarenas-Arnold. Can you get the same version you had from him at Oregon State at USC? And if you do, he's one of the better linebackers that's going to be in the Big Ten. I think another question is Mason Cobb. We all know that Mason Cobb can play at an extremely high level. We saw it as an Oklahoma State Cowboy. Can we get that version of Mason Cobb this year with D'Anton Lynn, Matt Entz taking over that linebacker room? And then you look at the defensive line and say that's probably where USC continues to need to make some moves, right? I think that USC defensive line during the spring game, you didn't have a lot of your guys, but I think it's no secret. We've been talking about this for the last couple of weeks. USC's got to add going into the Big Ten, right? It's not enough to just have a guy like Bear Alexander in the middle. We talk about depth. We talk about having 5, 6 guys on the inside of that defensive line that need to be able to play at a high level. I think USC might be at 2 or 3. So, yes, they need to make some improvements on the inside of that defensive line. Lincoln Riley has made it very clear that he's going to make those improvements. And I'd say this, if USC adds 2 or 3 quality defenders on the inside of that defensive line, I look at this USC depth chart and say, I think you got some really good players at that edge position. Right, potentially a guy like Nate Clifton who can work inside, can work out. Same thing with Anthony Lucas. Braylon Shelby is going to be very good in 2023. Jamil Muhammad is a guy that, again, could have gone to the NFL draft had he wanted to. You look at the linebacker room and say, what about a guy like Eric Gentry? With all the potential in the world and different ways that you can utilize a guy like Eric Gentry, largely a unicorn at that linebacker position who was completely mismanaged by Alex Grinch and that defensive coaching staff in 2023. How does D'Anton Lynn, Matt Entz get to work with Eric Gentry, whether he's coming off the edge, whether he's playing that overhang role linebacker spot? A lot of different ways you can use Eric Gentry. And then you look at that secondary and say, USC tackled horribly last year. They blew, they blew a ton of coverages. You look at this secondary now and say, from what we saw during the spring game, that is a very, very good unit. That was a unit that USC's offense, with all that talent at that wide receiver spot, really struggled to push the ball down the field. You completely revamped it, not only from a personnel standpoint, but from a coaching staff standpoint. And so I think the conversation is, why can USC have a massively improved defense heading into 2024 it's two things. One, I think from a personnel standpoint, they got better. You guys see the depth chart with all those yellow names. Those are the names that were added in the transfer portal. And then secondly, and I think arguably most importantly, you have a brand new coaching staff, and a coaching staff that is proven to be a phenomenal coaching staff, right? D'Anton Lynn, if D'Anton Lynn can do what he did at UC, we just saw D'Anton Lynn do this. I think that's probably the overarching takeaway is this UCLA defense took a massive stride in 2023. We just saw D'Anton Lynn do that. Who's to say that they can't do that in the 2024 season as well? Am I saying that this USC defense is going to be a top 35 unit in the country? It's going to probably not. But if you're saying that they can't be a top 60 group and kind of improve to be just an average defense heading into 2024, I don't think there's a reason to say they can't do it. Now, obviously, you got to see it on the football field. You got to see it manifest in 2024. But there's a lot of reason to believe that this USC defense is going to take some strides in 2024. Would love to hear what you guys think in the comment section. Again, appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.